all around the world, countries are moving in lockstep towards what looks like an inevitable destination. 2 years ago, you probably never would have imagined we'd be where we are right now. Things are changing so fast, you can hardly keep up. We've gone from 2 weeks to slow the spread to a lifetime of boosters and mandates. And now they're even talking about daily pills. Soma, anyone? But is there a silver lining within all this craziness? I truly believe there is, so long as we hope for the best and prepare for the worst. Let's talk about how on today's show. Welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. It's good to be here. Uh, yeah, it's very good to be here. Today's going to be a little bit different of a show, and I'll explain why. I was going to be covering abortion, and then I was going to cover the audits, maybe talk about the jabs. But I put out a question yesterday, and I asked folks just what was on your mind. I put this out on Telegram, where I've got I think probably the most active following, and I just want to see where you're at because while I sometimes I do feel like I have a message I want to tell you or some research I've done, I also think it's important that I'm really kind of in sync with what you're thinking about, how you're doing, what's weighing on your mind, so we can talk about those things. And I got, gosh, probably over 500 responses, very very fast. And people were asking about, okay, thinking about the audits. Some people talking about devolution. Some people were talking about obviously the jabs and the mandates. But I saw a repetitive theme that people were just asking, how do we prepare? I'm really worried. How can I prepare for what's going on? And so I thought, you know what? Let's just have that conversation. So this is not going to be a super fancy show. I don't have any fancy graphics or websites and articles to show you, but I want to talk about how I've prepared for where we're at, where I've found hope. I still, I look, I know that I might be a little bit, out there on the spectrum of hope, but I really do have hope that I believe is grounded in very real things. And no, it's not just hope in some devolution idea or something like that. It's real hope. So I look forward to seeing your questions coming up in the chats. If you see me glancing around a lot, it's because I'm reading what you're saying to me. And also, this is now being broadcast live on Rise TV as well, which I'll talk about a little more later in the show. What's happening with Rise TV? But at the end of the main show, I will go to Rise only for an uncensored Q&A. Some people like to ask my opinion about the jab or my opinion about 2020 election. And some of the things that YouTube does not like me to talk about, things that are actually true. Imagine that. So anyway, so towards the end of that, we'll be transitioning over to Rise TV. So yeah, so just to jump in, thank you everyone for coming. I see I've got MAGA 2020 here, Lisa M, a lot of my favorite people, Alina over on Rise TV, Deep Stank Pickle, good to see you here as well. I'm so thankful for everyone here. I've even got one of my favorite people, Peter Almas, a guy that he always comments. He goes, "Man in America is a cozy guy." I love reading those comments. So it's good to be here. One thing is that sometimes people they comment on my videos. They say it's a video about the audits. And they'll say, I've watched for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just all this fluffy talk. Let's get down to business. If you've been watching me for a while, that's not really how I do things, especially my live shows. I do these live shows because I want to connect with you. I don't do them not like a Sean Hannity or Tucker, Tucker Carlson getting up here with a pre-written 20-minute thing where I'm just banging through the facts. Sometimes I take a little bit of time because I got to update you. I got to check in, see how you're doing, let you know how I'm doing. So if you're here for some quick fix or here's a secret, you're not going to find it. What you're going to find though is a real, genuine conversation talking about things that matter a lot to me and hopefully to you. Because I can tell you that the whole concept of prepping is something I take very seriously. I'm not somebody I don't have 50-gallon drums of ammunition buried in my backyard. I'm at that level of things, but I do feel like I have to be responsible to my family, and I've taken a lot of steps to do that. So I want to share with you where I'm at with those things. Also, how I view what's happening with the jab. I know Biden's making some announcements that we'll see coming out today, which are probably not going to be very good. And also, if you've been following, you know that my wife is an Australian, and we've got family over in Australia. So, they're literally living through this and seeing what it's doing, and I can see the family over there basically just dividing. As you see that some people are really kind of buying into the propaganda, the news, everything, and a few folks also are saying, "Look, this is tyranny," and they're not standing up for it. So I'll share with my thoughts on that. So anyway, this is going to be just one of those conversations that it's just going to be relaxing and peaceful, like hopefully you'd expect from Man in America. So jumping into things, as I mentioned, the question I asked on Telegram, "How you doing?" People were talking about devolution, the odds. So we're going to get into some of those things. I'll share my thoughts on those. But I wanted to start with talking about how I view what's happening here. So fundamentally, I really do believe that we are at war. And this is really important. I think it's really important that we frame what's happening because life is not normal, as we all know. And life is not going to get normal. Life's going to become, there's going to be a new normal, but it's not going to be the new normal that the globalists talk about. I believe that there will be something after this phase of history that becomes our new normal, but it's not going to be Blade Runner where we're all living within that kind of technocracy. I think it'll be a normal that exists without a lot of the evil that's currently in our world. So that's something that we can talk about. So looking at with where we are right now, though, I think it's really, really important that we understand that we are at war. Trump talked a lot about this. If you go into a lot of the devolution stuff, Trump talked a lot about China and how China attacked our country. It was an act of war. The release of COVID, which, as you see now, it's now coming out that it was taxpayer money. It was funding gain of function research in Wuhan. There's no way getting around it. So um, but as Trump was talking about, this is a war. That was an act of war. China's releasing that. What happened in November 2020? Right? If you trace the whole again the devolution idea, which whether you believe that or not, there's a lot of facts behind that you are hard to ignore. One of the biggest ones is being that Trump put into place basically making it so that our election systems became critical infrastructure, right? That wasn't happening. It wasn't like that before. So the elections became critical infrastructure, meaning if someone attacked that, it's the equivalent of attacking, say, our power grid. That is an act of war, right? So and what's interesting is that if you've been following what happened in the past day, there's an executive order that Trump had signed. I forget the exact numbers of it, but it was an executive order about basically the foreign interference in November 2020. Um, Again, of course, I'm on commie too, so I have to be careful with some self censorship. But again, I still talk about things. I just do it in a way that they're not going to say, "Hey, there's a big red flag" by saying these few words in a row. But Trump set this executive order, and what's interesting is that Biden just renewed this executive order, which is very odd because, yeah, thank you, since the 8. So it's Executive Order 13848. But that's what's very interesting is that Biden just renewed that executive order, which to me, that points more to the fact that there's something going on. It's not what you think it is at the surface. But back to the original point, we are at war. We have a hostile enemy, which I believe is China. Now, a lot of people they've talked about the globalists. They talk about Klaus Schwab and the UN and the Rothschilds and Rockefellers and all these things. And what's important is that look. I've been following them for quite a while. I don't talk a lot about that stuff publicly, especially on YouTube, but I've done a lot of deep dives into those things, trust me, and I know where they fall. I know about the 13, families and the bloodlines and these things, but I don't think that that stuff is as relevant right now. I think it is to a certain degree. Ah, thank you, Marco, for pulling up. Everyone's just, I got Marco on the line helping me out here. So, people that are over on Rise know Marco well. So thank you, Marco, for pulling that up about the executive order. So I know that there is this the globalists, all these people that kind of you point at, Soros, who was just photographed with Pelosi of all people. But what I believe is that the the Chinese Communist Party, which was Mao initially funded by these people, has become it's like it's Frankenstein's monster. And you can even see now that there's infighting. It looks like Soros is coming out talking about Xi Jinping, and there's some things that are happening there. So, in the past, I've always talked about all roads lead to China. And I really do believe that. I really do believe that they are the true enemy of freedom. I believe that while the globalists may have propped up the CCP, I think that the CCP has taken that power and now they're trying to run with it. It's like you see in the mob movies very commonly, right? The mob boss, well, he's the big boss. He's always been the boss. There's a young up and coming guy he helps bring up, and eventually that guy ends up whacking him when the guy's sleeping, and he thinks he can take control. So I think that's what the CCP is. That's why I really point at the CCP because if you look at what we're experiencing right now, you look at what happened in November 2020. You look at what happened with COVID being released. You look at the fact that there's Chinese warships getting closer to America now, and approaching the seas that we're in. There are a lot of things happening, but all these things go back to China. Even if you look back at, I've done a lot of different research into, some of the things that the Chinese have spoken about. Some of I think it was their Minister of Defense maybe around 20 years ago talking about how a biological attack on America was the key to bring us down. In 2016, the People's Liberation Army of China, the PLA, published I think it was 261-page book specifically about specifically about how a biological attack on America would be the best and one of the only ways to bring America down. And now I have a lot more to say about the CCP that gives me a lot of hope, actually, which I'm going to save for a little bit later. But the core point is that fundamentally, we have to look at this as that we're at war, and when you can accept that, it's actually a lot easier to make decisions in your life that can help protect us. I know that I've got family members that I've been talking to them, and they want so much for things to be normal again, and it's holding on to that desire for things to be normal again that in a lot of ways, I think that's what makes us comply. That's what makes us not step forward and do the things we need to be doing. Because if this was World War II and you saw what was happening and you saw tanks rolling out over in Europe and all these things, we'd probably be acting very differently. But the problem is that we've been subverted and silenced and we've been distracted so that we are just focusing on what's right in front of us. And so then we're saying, like, look at Australia. We're saying, well, if you just do this, we'll get back to normal, right? 2 weeks to slow the spread. Okay, 2 more months of lockdowns. And that's the problem is that everyone keeps saying, yeah, I just want life back to normal. So I'll do this thing. It's the carrot they keep dangling. I'll wear masks, for a little while. If it slows the spread and we can cross over that little area and get back to normal. I'll get the jab if it means I don't have to wear masks. Well, for anyone who's paying attention, do you not see that there is no backing off on this? People that want power, people that are evil and power hungry, once they get that power, they don't give it back, right? So we have to take it back. We have to stop giving into these things. So I really try to look at this and say this is a war. And if you look at it as being a war, then you start looking at those things and you start looking at the masks or the jab and saying, you know what, like this is not normal. I'm not going to comply. Like I might have to make some sacrifices, which I'm going to talk about in today's show. But you're saying I'm not going to be giving into that. Now, when I frame this as being a war, there's a really important point that to me helps me look at how to approach this entire situation. And that's that I believe that this is a spiritual war. And I truly believe that. And if you look at communism, like I believe what we're experiencing right now is we're experiencing really in a lot of ways the final showdown between freedom and tyranny. If you look at trace back the history of our world, countries were always run basically by tyrannies. Like it was whether it was a monarchy or a true tyranny, it was usually a single small group in control of everybody. America was the first place that ever had this experiment of freedom and democracy in the Constitution. So there's always been this battle playing out. But I think that now what we're really seeing is that this is a spiritual war. It's good versus evil. And while say 5 years ago, say you mentioned it to somebody, they would have said, yeah, okay, like I'm not really a church goer or, yeah, whole Satan stuff. But like, what are we seeing now? We are seeing that, okay, like they've closed the churches down, yet you can go to strip clubs. they have, they're making businesses shut down, small businesses shut down, yet the casinos are still open. You can't go visit your grandma, but you can, go have your baby killed at taxpayer expense. Like, there's something very, very deep going on. And if you look at again, when I say all roads lead to China, I mean, even in the spiritual battle, because my personal belief is that, Satan, the specter of communism, the most evil thing, has taken root within the Chinese Communist Party. And if you look at their specific persecution of Christians, of Uyghur Muslims, of Falun Gong, the organ harvesting of these people, it's it's actually something truly evil. It's something that's truly evil behind them, and that evil is trying to consume really the entire world, but that evil knows that it has to take down America to do that. And so that's why, like, I feel very blessed to be in America at this time. I feel like I've been chosen for this fight that we're in right now. And that's what in a lot of ways, that is what really inspires me to keep going, is understanding that it's a spiritual war. But how I like to frame things is that, okay, if it's a spiritual war, and if this is, basically God versus Satan, which, if you look at Karl Marx, Karl Marx, he pledged his soul to Satan to wage a war on God. Right? To me, it's like, make no mistake, communism is the political party of Satan. Communism is how Satan can infiltrate entire the world's governments, and creep in and take over. If you imagine, say, 15 years ago, you imagine looking forward to seeing the battle of good and evil, you wouldn't necessarily think that there's, a half a billion or a few billion Satanists versus a few billion Christians. Like, it wouldn't play out like that. It's actually through communism that this has been infiltrated, and even now, so you're seeing even Satanism more. You're seeing it if you look at the abortion issue, and the fact that it's like, who's come out against the strongest against the abortion case in Texas, right? They passed the Heartbeat Act, saying that you cannot have an abortion after there's a heartbeat, which that's, to me, that's a huge, huge win for good in America. But it's actually, it's the Satanic Temple of Texas that is coming out strongest against that. They're claiming that the government, basically, they're claiming it's their constitutional right, because of the First Amendment, to have abortions, because they consider abortions a religious sacrifice ritual. And so they're saying that by banning them from having abortions, it's actually getting in the way of the First Amendment, which is their freedom to practice their own religions, which is just insane. But it's like, you cannot ignore the fact that this is a spiritual war happening. So that's where I start. Like, if people say, "How do you prep?" Right? How do you prepare for what's happening right now? How do you approach what's happening right now? I say, "Okay, well, this is a war," and I say, "This is a spiritual war." So, if this is a spiritual war, well, this isn't 1776. We're not grabbing our muskets and running into to battle. We're doing things like what I'm doing. It's an information war. So I made a YouTube channel. You might be doing, local canvassing, or working on the audit in your own state. You might be going onto social media, or you might be going to school boards and educating people. Like, we are all fighting the war in our own way. But we should not forget the fact that any of us that are doing something in this, we're soldiers. Like, we are soldiers in this war right now. And actually, what's crazy is, in a lot of ways, our military depends on us. In so many ways, our military even depends on we, the people, to be stepping forward and doing things. And so, if I look at myself as a soldier, I say, okay, I'm a soldier. It's a spiritual war. Well, how do I strengthen myself? Well, for me, I need to become better. I need to become better spiritually. If you look at how communism infiltrates, it does it through the vices of people. If you go back to the Plot to Steal America, the original video, which I recommend watching, it's still up on YouTube. It's amazing. But I talk about communism, how it seeps in through the vices of corrupt politicians. It creeps into society, and that's what this is about. Is that because every vice that we have, whether it's lust or greed or jealousy, those are the things that the evil uses to control people. And so, if you look at a lot of what the radical left has become, I think that jealousy is one of the major things that they're using. Jealousy, I believe, is one of the strongest tools that communism uses, right? And if you follow me on Telegram, I put a post out with this, where it's, how does communism really take root? Well, the 1%, I didn't mean the 1%, I mean like the 0.0001%, right? Which is the banking cartels, a lot of some of the politicians, some of the celebrities, the people that own the big, corporations, et cetera. Um, if you look at that and you look at how communism works, is like what they do is they make the lower class jealous of the middle class, and they use that jealousy to say, "Hey, you deserve what they have. Help us overthrow them." And then the lower class overthrows the middle class, and now the lower class and the middle class are completely in control of the ruling elites, right? That's how they work. So when I look at how do I strengthen myself, to me, it's the armor of God, right? Now, when I talk a lot about faith, and I talk something about Christianity or some of the different religions, but I like to present things in a way that anybody watching can walk away from this and feel like they need to increase their faith, whatever that means to them. Because I do believe that right now there's one enemy of mankind. I think it's Satan, in the Chinese Communist Party, and so that enemy is attacking Buddhists, it's attacking Christians, it's attacking Taoists, it's attacking everybody. And so that's why my message is usually, look, we have to strengthen ourselves with God, and you can take that and kind of interpret it how you want to. But for me, what that means is I need to improve myself spiritually. Say I think it was 15, 20 years ago, I stopped drinking alcohol. That was a decision I made at one point. I said, you know what, I don't need it. But since obviously that was a long time ago, but I look at, okay, I cancel my Netflix. Netflix has a lot of rotten stuff on there. I now listen to classical music. As much as I used to, gosh, I loved AC/DC, Metallica. It's like, well, if I'm listening to a song called Highway to Hell, is that gonna help improve me spiritually? So I listen to now mostly this classical music. Um, looking at my relationship with my wife and my family and how we do things. Like I'm really trying to look at how can I improve myself morally? Because if this is a spiritual war, well, it's like on both ends of the spectrum, the more evil you are, the more powerful you are, and the more good you are, the more powerful you are. So that's what really helps me. That's what actually is a massive motivator for me to just try to improve myself spiritually and pray and meditate and just do things that I think would get me closer to God, and it's helped me. And I feel a lot of strength from that, and that also gives me a lot of hope as well. So that's one, that's just one thing, one way I look at things that really helps me. Now, I talked about the CCP, and in the past I've talked about how all roads lead to China, which I think is really important because this is also something that gives me a lot of hope. Because if you look at the CCP, and I want to dig into this more. I'm going to try to get Jeff Nyquist on for another interview because um, I want to dig into this in a much deeper way so that everyone can understand the state of China right now, because I believe that so much of these attacks that we're seeing is because China is in a very, very desperate place. And I say China, I really mean the CCP. The Chinese people, I feel bad for most of the Chinese. I know a lot of Chinese people, and actually a lot of Chinese people hate the Chinese Communist Party. So this is the key, is that when I talk about China, it's really the Chinese Communist Party. So if you look at the fact that so much of what's happening right now, which look, I think that, for a lot of us, we're looking at the world, we're saying, like, "What the heck is happening?" We've got the mandates, we've got Afghanistan, it seems like the whole world is turned upside down. You look at places like Australia, and it's like, "Oh my gosh." Like, is Australia just a test? Is it just a test run for America? People are talking about that. Well, I have my thoughts about that, so good luck coming to America and trying to implement those policies, right? There's a reason why they stripped the Australians' guns so long ago. But there's this, if you look at the whole world, as I mentioned in the intro, like, it feels like the whole world is on this collision course, and that we're headed into this, very, very dark place, which I'm not gonna try to lie to you and say that I think that it's gonna be all hunky dory and all great. I think that we do have some I think that we do have some very difficult times ahead of us. But, one of the things that truly does give me hope is that I believe that the Chinese Communist Party is truly on the verge of collapse. And look, if the if the Chinese Communist Party collapses, we will see the whole world change instantly. How many of our politicians do you think are controlled by the CCP? How many of the media are controlled by the CCP? How many of even our local school boards, teacher unions? How many of these even say politicians over in other countries? Look at what's happening in China, or sorry, in Australia. And you look at the and you look and you can see, oh my gosh, yeah, this Australian politician, which is now pushing the new world order, they've got a lot of ties to the CCP. So if the CCP collapses, the globalists, Klaus Schwab and the banking families, without the CCP, they lose, right? The CCP has become too powerful. So many of these systems are put into place by the CCP. Look at the supply chains, right? Yeah, see, I'm not the man mentioning that, or no, it's someone mentioning that on Deep Stank Pickle on Rise TV, talking about the supply chains. So again, there are so many things that tie straight back to the CCP. Look at what's happening with new cars. Right? I was recently out at Bard's Fest, and there was an entire parking lot, there was an entire massive parking lot of brand new trucks that could not be sold because they didn't have the microchip, right? So the Chinese Communist Party has so much control over this earth, but if they fall, we will see so many of these control mechanisms change very, very quickly. And I think that we would be entering a new era. I do think that there's still more things that would have to happen from that, right? There's still a lot of other evil in this world, but the in in this world, if the CCP falls, I do believe that that would be the beginning of the end for evil around the world. Okay, so Andrew Sparkman, thank you for asking. What makes me think the CCP is about to collapse? Okay, well, a few things. One is that the CCP needs our farmland. Okay, and this is a very, very important point to understand. And again, if you go back to the previous interview I did with Jeff Nyquist, even if you look at some of the things that their own people put out, the Minister of Defense gave a speech specifically talking about that. The China needs to colonize America for our farmland. As much as they want to push the whole global warming thing, it's like if you live in America like I do, you drive through the countryside, it's like we could fit a lot more people here. We're not going to hit some population limit and then we're all going to die. It's like you could have, I think I saw somewhere, I think it was actually Curtis Bowers had said that you can fit the entire world population in Texas. Like, no joke. It might be a little bit tight, but um, the thing is that they need our farmland. Which again, Chris from Michigan saying, yeah, Bill Gates is buying a lot of that. Yes, I know the CCP owns land in Texas. Magalorian Texan, saying that, which is very true. But the majority of the land is not owned by the CCP in America, but they need that farmland because they have destroyed their ecosystem, right? The pollution, everything, like it is their water system, it is destroyed. So they are actually having a very hard time feeding their population. So that's just one thing. So like the CCP, they're at a point where they are literally on the verge. They have starving people in their country that they cannot feed because the crops aren't producing. They've had natural disasters, a lot of those things like that are happening, that's putting them in a very precarious situation. So I think that so many of the actions that we're seeing play out is actually out of desperation. And what happens when your enemy is out of desperation? What happens when the enemy is on the verge of dying? It's trying to do something. It's not like the CCP is in this powerful, comfortable place where they're rolling out this plan they've had for decades, and everything is in control, everything's going away, going as much as as perfectly as they planned. It's like that's not happening. Like what's happening is Trump got in 2016. He completely put the screws to China. I mean, the tariffs, everything, even Trump alone almost caused a collapse of the Chinese Communist Party because he was the first president to step in and say, sorry, like we're going to stop selling ourselves off like a whore to China. Sorry, pardon my language, but that's what the previous presidents were doing. He comes in and really puts things to them, brings back manufacturing, the whole "Make America Great" thing. America first, like that's key, right? So it's like America first, not China first, because all these previous politicians, Bill Clinton, the Bushes, Obama, certainly, right? And Kissinger, right? Henry Kissinger, all these people, they sold America off to China. Trump came in 2016, said, "Sorry, I'm not doing that anymore," and cut off so many of so much of their lifeblood. So that's why they had to get him out. Like if you think that COVID was just about a virus randomly coming out, no, COVID became the pretext for what happened in November. COVID was all along their plan, but the thing is like all things made in China, COVID did not work very well. And so I think that what happened was that COVID was rushed. It was rushed out. It did not have the desired effect because if you read through the literature of the Chinese military, as I've talked about, they talk about a bioweapon, but the bioweapon they're talking about is something that actually would wipe out a lot of people. It's not happening, right? Turn the TV off. There's no more virus anymore. All right. Yes. Do I believe that it is a real virus? I do. I think it's a variation of the flu, though. I think that it's been completely politicized, and I have a lot more thoughts on it that I don't really talk about on YouTube. But again, I think the whole thing was planned, but it wasn't executed very well. But again, that was out of desperation. That was out of desperation on China's behalf, right? Actually something say share something interesting about Kissinger, and this is just a weird story, but my brother, if you know my background, my brother passed away from cancer in 2015, and he was in the hospital in New York City. We were both living in New York City at that time, and he was in the heart wing, the critical heart ICU. I forget what they call it. And what's kind of crazy is, who was in the room right next to us was Henry Kissinger. It was the weirdest thing ever that literally Henry Kissinger was in there because he had a heart problem. And so he was literally in the room, like right next to us. And we saw his son in the elevator, and I saw his wife wandering around, and just kind of a crazy side story just to throw out there. It's just odd, very odd. So with China, though, okay, you look at the farmland issue. That's one thing. There's the quit the CCP movement, which actually, Marco, if you could bring up this website. So there are people in China that years back started a quit the CCP movement for people to publicly renounce their memberships, whether it's the Young Pioneers, the the main Communist Party, and one other, I forget the third one. But basically, there have been yes, there you go. So as of right now, 383 million people have left publicly said that they are leaving the Chinese Communist Party. So this is really, really important because if you look at what has led, like for a communist nation to survive, it has to keep its people under control. Because once um, I'm not sure what that is there, but once people start really seeing through the Chinese Communist Party or through a communist party, that's what leads to the party's demise. And that's why, if you look at Romania, for instance, so Romania, which was at one point under terrible communist regime, one of the major things that allowed Romania to break out of that was that there was a defector that wrote a book called Red Horizon, which I think I have it back in my library behind me, and it was basically exposing he defected to the US, and it was exposing the Romanian Communist Party. Then it was Radio Free Europe that started broadcasting that book into Romania, okay? And once the Romanian people started listening to that book, they started to see through the regime, and that was one of the main triggers that led to the fall of the Communist Party in Romania. So the fact that there's been almost 400 million Chinese that have publicly signed this petition saying, yeah, Red Horizons, very, very good book, especially if you want to understand communism. And again, I highly recommend it. But if you look at the fact that 400 million Chinese people have already publicly renounced the Chinese Communist Party, like I said, I know a lot of people that are from China. Through the Epoch Times, I met a lot of people that had escaped from China, that were living under communism. And in China, say 20 years ago, you would not talk about distrust for the CCP. Like even in your private home, you would not talk about how evil the CCP was. People were so scared of it, but they're no longer scared of it, right? They're actually and they're publicly renouncing their membership. So that's a big thing right there. The other thing is that there is another book that came out recently. That's the English petition. So actually, if anybody wants to go sign that, even as a Westerner that's a non-Chinese Communist Party member, they've already got about almost 1.5 million signatures on there, which is just this is basically people kind of coming out saying, "Look, I think that the Chinese Communist Party is evil, and I do not want to support it." So that's endccp.com, which I think is if you want to go sign it, I highly recommend that because it's just people all over the world saying, "Look, like we reject the Chinese Communist Party. These things really weaken a regime." Though it might seem like it's just some simple thing, it's not. So again, now there's a different book I was called China Coup, which I'm only about a third of the way through reading it. But what this is talking about is, and I've heard it through many things before, is that the what's also happening is that China is also extremely splintered. So you have to understand that when the previous, he was the kind of supreme ruler of China, Jiang Zemin. So Jiang Zemin was an extremely, extremely evil person. He's the one that was behind a lot of what happened in the Tiananmen Square massacre. He was the main force behind the Falun Gong persecution. So when he left power, he never really left power. So then you had Hu Jintao, you now have Xi Jinping. So think of these as two factions, right? Now in China, it's which is common in a lot of communist countries, where you might have factions within the government. Similar to here, I think you can see that you have, yeah, there's the book China Coup. You have people that are loyal to, say Trump or loyal to Biden. Well, it's either people that are loyal to Trump or they hate Trump. No one's really loyal to Biden. All right. But over in China, though, basically this entire faction. So Jiang Zemin, he set up his entire network within the Chinese government, the spy network, everything. So now Jiang Zemin is not supportive of Xi Jinping, and there is really intense infighting, and even a lot of the intelligence that Xi Jinping is getting from the Chinese intelligence is actually false intelligence. So if you think about the fact that Xi Jinping is the one driving the Chinese Communist Party right now and orchestrating this global takeover, yet at the same time, so much of his own internal intelligence being fed to him is false. This also shows you that China is very fractured. It is not some, like you'd think, like this very strong, beast of something that's going to be this big tank rolling over the entire world. It is so fractured. And actually, the author of this book, who is an expert on China, he believes, and I've read this in numerous other places, that China is also on the verge of a coup. That there are people within China, at very, very high level people within the government, that want to overthrow Xi Jinping. So again, it's like if you look at your enemy, if your enemy is that divided, it's like, okay, that's another big sign that this is really going off the rails there. So again, another thing that's showing how weak China truly is. The other thing with that is the natural disasters. So I believe that God is starting to really show his wrath against China. Like I've talked about, the CCP has done so many terrible things, the organ harvesting, et cetera. So if you look at what's happening in China, they are having floods, they're having droughts, they're having tornadoes, they're having rivers turn to blood. It's like the plagues that you read about in Revelations. These things are happening in mainland China, and this is something that's further weakening them. So again, all these things together, to me, I look at that and I say, okay, I know things seem really tough. I know that we've got, Joe Biden. That's just a train wreck in America. All these things happening, but at the same time, it's like all roads lead to China. At the same time, I can see that they are so weakened. So I see John Anon saying that yeah, CCP owns many politicians: Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, Feinstein, Newsom. Yeah. So what happens when the CCP falls, right? Those people will fall with them. Okay. So that's a really important thing. So again, this is what I talk about with hope. This episode is called "Hope for the Best, Prepare for the Worst." I really do have a lot of hope with that, and again, this is without the whole devolution idea. I know that there's been a lot of different people. Is devolution real? Is this something that I can believe in? I'm tired of all the hopium, and so you can see that like my hope does not come from devolution. My hope comes from understanding who our enemy is, understanding who we are, and understanding how weak our enemy is. All right. Now, understanding who we are as well, it's like, do you think that they're going to be able to take on America? Okay, yeah. So say Australia has easily fallen to tyranny. Well, they took their guns away, they took their God away. Australia, by and large, has been a very atheist country. Sorry to my Aussie mates, but through talking to my wife, it's like God has really been stripped out of Australia. There's still religious folks there, but it's very different than America, where our country was founded on these Judeo-Christian values, right? So that's the thing is that China will have a very, very, very hard time with this. Not to mention, we have the world's largest standing army, which I'm going to talk about the Second Amendment as part of my, trying to talk about prepping. But with devolution, do I believe that devolution is real? Personally, I do. Um, I don't think that it's something where Trump has like he's the master coordinator and everything is under control because Trump has the playbook and that kind of stuff. I don't believe that stuff entirely. But what I do believe is that there are very good people in our military. What I believe is that if you look at the 11 combatant commanders, these are the people that truly are in charge of the military, and all 11 combatant commanders. There's actually all 10 of them were put in place by Trump, and the 11th one, Aquino, I forget how to pronounce his name. Though he wasn't put in place by Trump, I think that he was recommended by Trump, and he also is the one that had overseen General Flynn's brothers. Something to do with General Flynn's brother coming into the military or be kind of being placed into his position. I think he's in charge of the Pacific Fleet. So I might be confused. So don't take that for gospel. But the thing is that there are a lot of things about devolution. And again, if you look at the recent executive order that Biden just re-signed, all these things, there's a lot of things to me that point to the military being in control. And that's the thing is that that's the hardest thing that I think I've dealt with. Yeah, Pacific Fleet. Thank you, Sonic Suicide. The hardest thing that I've had to deal with in the I guess the human realm is thinking that we've been abandoned by Trump and the military, and thinking that these people that I have a lot of friends in the military. It's the thinking that these people that commit their life to protect us and to protect our nation, that they just stepped aside, and that's what. So I think looking in the devolution, though I think there's a lot of splintering, I do believe that so much of of devolution is actually real, but I'm not relying on it. I'm not putting all my hope into it. I'm exploring it. I like the idea. I like Patel Patriot. He's a great guy. If you didn't see my interview with him yet, I highly recommend you watch it. So it's something I'm following closely, but I'm not just sitting back and trying to put all my hope into that. I'm putting my hope into things I have control over. So I want to jump into this subject just of prepping a little bit because this is something that, and again, in the question I put out there, people were asking, how do we prepare? Even at some of the conferences I've been going to, people are coming up and saying, hey, Seth, how do I do this? How do I do that? So I just want to walk you through what I've done and how I've looked at things and just tell a little bit about my process because maybe it's helpful for you. So for one, I got out of the big city, right? Almost 2 years ago at this time, I was living in New York City. I had a business there. I was, kind of reading a lot about prepping, but you can only prep so much living in an apartment in New York City. So the first step for me in doing that was coming back to Ohio, right? I grew up in Ohio. So that's the first step for me was getting out of the big blue city. So, for those of you, and I'll talk a little bit about moving, but if say you're living in LA, say you're living in Portland, you're living in New York City, it might be difficult, but try to find a way to get out. Try to find a way to relocate. And I'll talk about relocating because it's difficult, but there's some upsides to that. So for me, it was getting out of the big city. I came back to Columbus, Ohio, where I was living in a suburb, and I was renting. My next step was to get out of Columbus, right? Though there's a lot less houses. It's a whole different kind of process. But when I was living in Columbus, I was living in Franklin County, right? So the mayor of Columbus just today, so tomorrow they're going back to a mask mandate in Franklin County. Franklin is a very Democrat county, right? So now when I was looking for houses, I had to be realistic, and so though a lot of the houses I was liking were in the Franklin County area, I went out. I went out further, probably an hour and a half or so away from Columbus out into the countryside. And for that, for less money, I was able to buy a nicer house with more land. I'm on about 5 acres now. And so for people that are, say, in the city or in a suburb, look, you might have to take a step down. I see someone actually saying, yeah, Magalorian Texan, travel trailers are cheaper than a house. That's true, right? I think, again, as I talked about before, if we are at war and if we're framing this from the perspective that we are at war, we might have to change some things about how we live. And the big blue Democrat run cities, I think that those cities are going to get worse and worse, right? I'm not going to try to, kind of hide away from the fact. Look at what's happened in New York City. Look at what's happened to LA. So I do think that the blue cities are going to get worse and worse. And in general, like I really recommend getting out of the big city in general. And if you're in the suburbs, maybe you're in a nicer suburb in a more rural area, which is good. But if you can, I highly recommend looking to relocate to somewhere where you can get a couple acres of land, where you can know your neighbors. One thing is, get to know your local sheriff. That's what I'm going to do that shortly. I'm going to be calling up calling up our sheriff, trying to go meet him, see what the sheriff's perspective is of the Constitution, try to find a constitutional sheriff. Because if they start implementing these kinds of crazy things, then you can, go to your local sheriff and say, look, the sheriff he might be saying, look, I don't agree with what Biden's doing with the Second Amendment. I'm not going to enforce it. Right? That's the thing, is that the sheriff has more power than the federal government when it comes to enforcing your local laws. The other thing, so is looking at land. Land is life. Actually, Marco is showing on Rise TV. There's actually a whole series about the survival guide, right? So get prepped, sheltering in place, a great outdoors, great series on there. But again, looking at getting land, I think that one of the problems with us is that we have become hooked into the globalist system, right? A lot of us, we moved away from the farms into the big cities. We've gotten their jobs. We don't know how to farm anymore, right? We have to get back to being more self-sufficient, right? So, for me and my family, it meant, even when I was living in a much more kind of suburban area, we were on about an acre of land, renting. We built a square foot garden. We put up garden beds, and my wife and we learned a lot about gardening. We had a massive, actually, it wasn't massive. It was a reasonable sized garden, but we learned a lot about how to garden, how to process the food, how to preserve food, which is a big thing. So learn how to garden, because the less reliant, less reliant we can be on the big government, the better off we're going to be. And again, they're talking about supply chain issues with grocery stores. So what happens? So say you're living in a suburban area and your local Kroger is the only place you buy your groceries. Well, look at Australia. Look at the videos of the empty grocery stores. So what happens when that all gets cut off? What happens when they say, sorry, we're going to limit the bread we can sell? Like, they have control over you, right? Well, go, you can get a 700-year-old sourdough starter on eBay for $10. Learn to bake bread, right? Learn to, how to feed it, everything like that. So the more self-sufficient we become, the less control they have over us. So getting on some land, building a garden, we're even looking at setting up an indoor garden. Right? I'm going to build shelves where, I've got LED lights, and I can be growing lettuces and arugula and vegetables all year round. Right. So again, that's one thing that's be more self you can be more self sufficient with that. Um, I bought a food dehydrator. Right. So learning how to dehydrate food and save food. There's a lot of things like that. The other thing that I'm gonna actually mention, what kind of ties into that in terms of prepping, is just your own health and the importance of taking care of yourself, eating as much as you can organically. And as some folks don't really buy into the whole organic thing, but if you look at what's playing out now, you look at the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and we know how corrupt they are, right? The CDC, and how corrupt they are. Well, they've been poisoning our food system for a very, very long time, especially in America, right? You look at the ingredients for, say Fruit Loops in America versus Fruit Loops in Europe, and it's like you can see they're poisoning America. So that's a big thing, is getting off, stop is as best you can, stop eating processed food. Do things that are going to be good for your health. buy some weights or start exercising, just doing push-ups and walking. Get your body healthy. All these things they make us more independent of the system, more independent of from the medical system, et cetera. So much of this. And again, back to food, like the other night for dinner, or actually, I made a giant pot of homemade bolognese. Okay, I went and harvested my tomatoes from my garden. Roasted tomatoes in the fridge. We bought a half cow. It's another big thing is that buy bulk, and the bulk is more expensive up front, but you save money. I bought half a cow. I'm talking. This is organic, grass fed, pasture raised, beautiful cow. About half a cow for 4.75 a pound, right? If I go to the supermarket and buy organic grass-fed beef, it's $8 a pound, right? So we bought half a cow. I got a freezer. My freezer I bought on Facebook Marketplace. I paid $300 for a giant, like 25 square foot commercial freezer on Facebook Marketplace. So you can do these things in an inexpensive way. You don't have to, have unlimited money to be prepping. So I bought a big freezer, about half a cow. So for dinner, we made this beautiful. I made 4 pounds of meat, this giant thing of bolognese, all organic, everything. And my price per meal was so inexpensive. It's my daughter's favorite food, by the way. Little baby June, she'll be a year in a couple weeks. She'll be a year old. Her favorite food is spaghetti bolognese, and she just eats it up. So again, like I learned how to do that. I bought a vacuum sealer for food, right? The dehydrator, so I can take the meat that I've bought and make jerky and dehydrate jerky. Like dehydrated fruit that's properly vacuum sealed will last, I think, around 25 years. The other thing is, stocking up on the essentials in terms of, food supply and stocking. Rice, I probably have, I don't know, 150 pounds of rice. Canned beans, all these things. I just keep them in storage. So these are all things that it's like, how are they going to control us? Well, what happens if they implement, the vaccine passports, and you can no longer go to your local supermarket? Well, you've got food at home. Build relationships with your local farmers. So that's the one thing that, coming to where I'm at now is I've got to meet. I'm slowly meeting some neighbors and saying, okay, this farm you can buy things here, that farm you can buy things there. Because what happens when the local Kroger said, sorry, passport only? Am I going to let my family starve? No. I now know who owns that small farm market. I found the grocery store owned by a local family. So these are all things that I really recommend you start thinking like this, because again, it goes back to, like, to me, what is prepping? Well, prepping in a lot of ways is actually just returning to, I think, how humans should live and being more self-sufficient, because the more self-sufficient you are, you're not controlled by the globalists. You're not controlled by the systems of the CCP, which will make us more resilient. The other thing is guns and ammunition. If you're blessed enough to be living in America, even though right now guns and ammo are expensive, just go get a couple. I will say that I have to stress this: learn safety, learn how to handle, learn trigger control. You don't walk around with your finger on the trigger, pointing the gun at things. Learn, take some safety classes, but even going out and buying a $500 9 millimeter used handgun will go a long way. Because in the future, whether you have to protect your property from a burglar because food is scarce and they're coming looking for it, or whether someone's coming in to try to force you to take some sort of experimental medication, being able to defend your own property, I believe it's our God given right. It's one of the most foundational things in the Constitution. So if you can, buy a gun, buy 1,000 rounds of ammo, even just a basic start like that, even if you get a cheap 22 rifle and 500 rounds of ammo, then you are infinitely better off than somebody with nothing, right? So that's a really, really important point. And then practice, learn the safety. Um, the other thing I mentioned is start building a community. So wherever you're at, build a community. Figure out who your neighbors are, talk to them. For me, I hung up a thin blue line flag in my front yard. I put a big flagpole up, thin blue line, so people know where I stand on those things. If I go out into my local community, you know what shirt I wear? I wear a shirt that says Trump won, because what it does is that it allows me to meet people in my community that um, it allows me to meet people in my community that I think will align with me and my values, right? I meet folks who are like, yeah, yeah, I know he did. And I start talking to them, and then the guy's like, "Oh, yeah, I've got a big farm and this." So meet people in your community, build a community of people that you can trust and you can rely on. That's another important thing because look, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if they might try to, they might try to make America more like Australia. But the thing is that I'm resisting that, and I'm setting up all the things that I can do to not be controlled by that because I don't believe that we're entering, like I mentioned before, I don't believe that we are entering into this stage of we're going to be descending and spiraling into this, like I said, Blade Runner or whatever you want to look to as your dystopian movie, 1984. I believe that's where they want to take us. And I think that we might dip down a little bit into that. But I do believe that at the end of the day, that God is in control and that enough people are now turning to God and correcting their ways and fixing these things and rejecting communism, that I don't believe that we'll be able to get into that kind of situation. But we might go, 6 months or a year with attacks on the food supply, with limited things. So I think it's good to prepare for those things. Like my goal is to prepare in a way that my whole family can live for a year. Like that's what I'm striving for. Okay. Now, for you, maybe you're saying, well, that's a lot. So, okay, look, aim for 1 month then, aim for 2 months. You'd be surprised how cheap it is. Look, if you go to Costco, you can buy organic rice. You buy a couple, say 100 pounds of organic rice. You can buy a bunch of black beans and other things like that. That stuff will last you a long time. I know that there's the Patriot Food Supply, and there's places that sell you the prepared meals that last 25 years. I don't have any in person. I have old Army MREs, but if you want to go that route, that's good. I tell you, it is less expensive to go buy a 50-pound bag of rice somewhere, but if you can afford it, those supply companies are actually pretty good. So that's something. But also, there's something that, and talk about the silver lining of this, that we're now approaching this time where we see these mandates, and uh, the actually, I see D Green mentioning the AR-15s. Yes, AR-15. Yes, if you can go out and buy an AR-15, you're going to be has a lot more stopping power, much better rifle to buy if you can. There's a reason why they want to go after those. If you get good with an AR-15, yes, the same guy with an AR-15 that's across the way, trying to come at you, it's going to do a lot better than your 22. So yeah, if you can get a hold of an AR-15, I do recommend that. Yes. Sorry, one more thing. I see Kim asking about water. So water is also a really, really important thing. If you can go out and buy, like I have tons of water, bottled water, etc. You can purchase little iodine tablets for purifying water. You can get life straws for drinking water. If you have a way to collect rainwater, it's really important. That's one of my next goals on my property is setting up rain collection so I can collect rainwater. So water is also extremely, extremely important, and take that very seriously. Like I'm glad that I think it was Kim. I'm glad you mentioned that. Um, Dehydrated water. It's a funny comment. But now jumping on to the mandates, and it's like, look, I know that they're pushing these mandates. Some people are having to lose their jobs over it. It's something that I would say stand strong with your beliefs. And I know it's difficult, but look, even if you have to change your lifestyle and you have to say move into a smaller home more in the country because of your financials have changed, well, maybe there's a blessing from that. Maybe it means that your wife doesn't have to work anymore and she can homeschool the kids. So I think that again, this is the thing is that if you look at this as like we are in a war, there's certain sacrifices that we have to make, and if it means that you're standing up and you have to go, live somewhere else and live in a more affordable area, sell your nice home in the suburbs, that might be something that you have to consider. Um, One thing I can share with you is that in our area, we were looking for a nanny, right? We needed help with our child because Kate and I both do Man in America more than full time. And so we wanted to find a nanny. And I tell you, I had such a hard time finding a nanny. And, there's just such a small supply of people. There's no one wanted to do it. So that's an area. So it's like maybe, you lost your job as a IT person, but maybe you can be a nanny, and find a family there that would have you help take care of their family, or you can do, say you start farming and you can do bartering. You can grow vegetables and trade them for something else. So I think that to look at we have to look at how we can kind of, again, get out of their system. That's one of the big things that we have to do, and sometimes it's going to be difficult, and that's everyone's being faced with that right now. Um, Let's see, I got my little list, making sure I'm getting through everything. There's a lot to talk about. Oh, one other thing actually is power. Okay. So right now we're actually getting a whole house generator installed. Now, those are expensive. So like it was even a stretch to say, oh gosh, can we do that? But we've got a lot of food in the freezer. If we had to go without power for 2 or 3 weeks, I can't afford to have my freezer full of food just rot. So if you have the option to get a whole house generator, I highly recommend it. If you don't, you can go to Costco or Home Depot, or better yet, your local hardware store. You can get a basic um, you can get a basic generator for 3, 4, $500. That if you have to, you can use that to run your fridge, to do all that. Just make sure that you've got gas. That's the one thing, is that make sure that you've got plenty of gasoline. If that's the case, so go out and buy. What I did is, before I got the whole house generator, I had a Craftsman generator. I went out and bought, I don't know, 15 or a dozen or so 5-gallon gas cans, filled them all up, just kept them, right? Just kept them set aside. So that's the other thing too. Also, Deb's saying, don't forget meds and spare glasses, etc. That's true. If you're on medication, try to stock up on that medication. Now, again, um, I'm not saying that we're going to enter into this society, this place where there's an EMP that goes off and we're living in, like, it's Mad Max happening in America. No, but I do think though that there might be a period of time where we have to hold out. We have to live uncomfortably, and we might have to make some lifestyle changes that we may not have wanted to, as we kind of transition into whatever's coming next. So maybe it's going to be 6 months of that, or maybe a year of that. That's so again, just something to consider, that, again, I don't think that we're entering into a, 20-year Mad Max scenario where everyone's gonna be driving around on go-karts and killing and raping everybody. No. But I do believe we might have some tough times ahead of us, that we have to prepare for. So that's kind of the overall part of that. So, gosh, it's already been an hour. If I could talk for a couple more hours on this stuff. And again, as I mentioned to you at the very beginning, um, this is going to be a more of a loose, more of a loose episode. One thing I do want to mention, before, we are going to be transferring over to Rise shortly, but I do a show on Rise TV called The Upside. Actually, Marco, if you could pull that up just to show people that. So every week I release a show called The Upside with Man in America, and it's usually a 20 to 30 minute show, very produced. It's not a live show, but it's a show where I talk about all the good things that are happening, and it's a really positive show. Even when I watch it myself, I'm like, life's not as bad as I thought that it was. So anyway, I just released my new episode of that yesterday. That's the intro to it. So, but actually, what I'm going to do though is today at 6 o'clock, I'm gonna premiere that episode on YouTube. So even though that Rise is normally only something that I have over on, sorry, The Upside is only on Rise TV, I'm gonna try to occasionally drop some of those episodes on YouTube for everyone else to see as well. But you can also, if you want to watch it, it's already up there on Rise now. Actually, Marco has up the current episode. It's The Upside with Man in America. Commies exposed from the classroom to the White House. It's a really good episode. If you do want to go check it out on Rise, there's a free trial. There's a link in the description. You can go check it out and watch it if you want to. But I will be premiering that episode on YouTube as well, for everyone to check out, because I do want to share that with you sometimes. And if you like it and you love it, and you say, you know what, I'll happily support it. And you want to subscribe, great. So just a little bit of quick background too. So Rise TV is, I'm actually one of the owners of it. It's a streaming platform. It's me and a few other patriots that I actually know from childhood. And that's how I do this for free, right? So when I come on YouTube, YouTube demonetizes almost everything I do. So there's no way to monetize here. As you probably see, I'm not on here saying, hey, invest in Noble Gold or do this. Like, I'm not taking sponsorships. And I'm going to continue doing as much as possible for free. But if you do want to support me, I'd recommend going up, subscribing to Rise TV. If you want to stick around there, it's about $10 a month. It's about a coffee a week. From that perspective. But there's a lot of really good content on there. I've got a lot of shows. I do other live shows on there. We also have like the prepping series. There's shows about communism. Like it's a great platform. But again, I know some of you are financially strapped, and so I will never go fully behind a paywall. I always want to do as much as I can outside the paywall because I want to be talking to you. And thankfully, I am still on YouTube, so I can reach a lot of people. So I'll keep doing that. But again, Rise TV on there, and I'll send out the updates to so you have the link for the premiere tonight. I'll be doing the premiere at 6 o'clock tonight of the Upside, so you can check that out. So, gosh, it's been over an hour. Sorry to get a drip of water. Ah, thank you all for sticking around. This has been a great, fantastic show, and I've really enjoyed talking. So I think I covered. Um, Actually, one last thing before we go to Rise is that the silver lining in a lot of this is that there is a new economy emerging. I saw something that was out on the Daily Caller. It says 75% of the unvaccinated will quit their jobs before they get the jab. It was a poll they did. So the more they start mandating these things, the more people are going to be quitting their jobs and leaving, and a new economy will emerge. And this is why I really recommend you go and you meet the local supermarket owner. You meet these people because we have to band together. We have to find other patriots that we can support and band together with them because when the Whole Foods and the Walmarts and these big businesses, when they start mandating these things, then you know what's going to happen? We're going to go elsewhere. And those businesses are going to fail and a new economy will emerge. But one thing is I would say is that never quit. Never quit. Make them fire you because that could help in the future. There's a lot of there's a lot of attorneys that are already stepping forward to help people with this. So make them fire you because then you have a lot more strength legally to come after them. So that's just one thing I'll say about that. But that's so that, again, there's some silver linings in all this. So, okay, so for those of you that want to continue on, I am going to do an uncensored Q&A over on Rise TV. So if you want to join, like I said, there's a free trial in the description. Look, if you join and do the free trial, then leave because you want to have this. I'm not going to hold it against you. That's okay. You can check it out. But if you do check it out and you do the free trial, just look around. You'll see some good content on there. So we're going to be just going over to Rise TV only because it's truly is uncensored. I'm one of the people that controls what content we allow on there. So you can imagine we talk about a lot of fun stuff over there. So anyway, I want to thank everyone who's come. This has been a good episode. I hope this has been a helpful episode for you. Next week, I'm going to try to be diving back into whether it's the audits or what's happening with those kinds of things, more serious stuff. But for this week, I just wanted to have more of this kind of heart to heart type show. Let you know where I'm at. Why I actually do have hope. What I've done to secure where I'm at. Anybody who's asking where the link is for Rise, it's in the description below. And actually, Marco, if you can copy that description and drop it into the chat, just so folks have it over there. You can find me over there on Rise. So, all right. So for thank you for everyone that has joined. It's been wonderful. There you go. Thank you, Marka. Marka. There is the link for Rise TV. So thanks again for everyone who's joined. I will be back again next week. I've got a few events coming up too. And if you're not following me on Telegram, so Telegram is where I am the most active. It's just Telegram. So t.me/man in America. So I do recommend you follow me on Telegram. That's where I'm the most active. And again, Telegram is completely uncensored. So I talk pretty openly on there as well. All right, so we're going to be turning off the YouTube, Rumble, and Facebook. So thank you for joining me on there, everybody. I will see you next week. And again, anybody who's asking where the link is, it's in the description So I see Lisa Morgan asking, it's in the description there for the video. You can find the link to Rise TV. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, so much. I'm going to end these streams and we're going to hop over onto Rise TV. All right.